Good morning, all. Cloud computing is going to solve world hunger and global warming. Certainly, if you're to believe the hype that crosses probably the inbox of many of you or the social media pages, you'll probably believe that type of hype. That's the hype that's around cloud computing. And while I believe that cloud computing will probably influence those two particular problems that face us as a world, I don't think we're quite ready yet for that, if you want, level of problem solving with cloud. Many organizations are investing in cloud infrastructure, whether they're service providers or enterprises, and they're realizing some of the benefits of cloud, but they're not necessarily getting the expected returns. I'm waiting for my presentation here. And why is that? Cloud issues, like IT issues, are multifaceted. And it really takes a multifaceted approach to solving some of those issues. And so 3 years ago, 12 of us, vendors, hardware vendors, software vendors, services vendors, network service providers, got together and formed an association to try and solve some of these multifaceted problems that not just one part of the industry was going to solve. And so we formed the association in order to do that. Now, over the years, we've been adding more members and also individuals with areas of specializations, lawyers, legislators, IT consultants, business consultants, even CIOs, to bring those areas of specializations to the association in order to address that. And so in that light, we formed a working group called the Public Policy and Regulatory Working Group within the association in order to see how we could engage public policy legislators and also regulators in order to accelerate the adoption of cloud within Asia and also specifically within Singapore. So one of the first meetings of our working group is, we're getting there with my presentation. At one of the first meetings of the working group, we decided, let me see, maybe I need to press next. Nope. We decided that there were a lot of studies that looked at cloud computing and measured countries on different facets of cloud computing, but none of those studies took a holistic approach. So we decided that in order to help regulators and legislators with the problem of the issues facing cloud computing and the adoption of cloud computing, we would build a cloud readiness index. And so we would develop a cloud readiness index. And so that cloud readiness index, obviously multidisciplinary, as it shows here. You can't just take one approach, but you need to look at it from a lot of different aspects. And so through a lot of conversations and consultations, and a lot of heated debate within the working group, we finally decided on 10 key attributes that would measure a nation's readiness to both host and promote the consumption of cloud services within the nation. And so the first 4 parameters that we settled on are the parameters that talk about the basic infrastructure. You know, broadband quality. Our previous speaker talked about the 5 characteristics of cloud. One of those is access, right? Broadband network access. Also the ability to have a stable and wholesome, if you want, power supply. Also that one that's sustainable. So we felt that that was an important element in the basic infrastructure required to offer cloud services. International connectivity, of course, because you need access to information not just within the nation but outside the nation, and you also want cloud providers to be able to offer their services not just within the nation but also to users outside. So that needed to be a strong component. And finally, data center risk. And I'll delve a little bit deeper into data center risk and what we mean by that, what we're measuring with data center risk a little later in the presentation. The next level of parameters looks at data from a 360 perspective. So data privacy, data protection within the nation, and then when you go outside the nation, data sovereignty. Right? What happens when data crosses borders? What laws apply to data that crosses borders? So we felt that that was a very big piece of work that needed to be done, and a lot of research that we did showed that there was very little concrete information around data sovereignty. And so one of the things that you'll hear from the Cloud Computing Association, and I have a slide on this, is all of the primary research we did around data sovereignty for all of the primary nations in Asia. Then the next level we looked at beyond that legislation and laws around data security is freedom of information access. How easy is information to be accessible? How freely is it available within a nation? What laws constrain it? Now, we understand that all nations have the right to constrain what information is made public, but that, of course, has to be balanced against the advantages that cloud computing can bring not only to the IT industry within the nation, but also to all industries, as our previous speakers talked about, right? Whether it's the financial industry, whether it's healthcare industry, right? How is that balanced against if you want, the right of a nation to constrict information access? So I'll explore that in a little bit more detail. And then also intellectual property protection, right? If you're going to publish cloud services and make information available through public cloud services to other people, you want to make sure that your information is protected, not only by law, but that the law is enforced. And then finally, the last parameter that we included in our Cloud Readiness Index has to do with government policy, usage of cloud, and incentives behind cloud. Now, for those of you who are from Singapore, and I consider myself, I've been in Singapore almost 10 years, I consider myself practically Singaporean. I'm a PR. And certainly, we're all aware of the incentives that the government and IDA has put around cloud. How do we make sure that those incentives are actually used by SMEs, and that government departments are actually using cloud for their IT, right? So we felt that that was kind of the cornerstone for measuring the readiness and accelerating the adoption of cloud within countries. So you might ask, where does Singapore sit in the Cloud Readiness Index, in the league table, compared to other countries? Well, hopefully, some of you have looked at our Cloud Readiness Index that we've produced for the last 2 years, and we're about to publish our third, as it said at the title slide here, third generation of Cloud Readiness Index. And here is a sneak peek at that index. Now, we're not publishing it today. We're going to publish it in January. We've decided to move from a November publishing date to a January publishing date. But this is what the data is like currently. It'll change slightly, but most likely the positions will stay in a similar way. Now, all of you from Singapore will be scanning, okay, where's Singapore? Okay, it's the fourth column from the right. Okay? And so we have Australia, China, Hong Kong, Sorry, my eyesight isn't as good. India, thank you, Indonesia, and so on, right? South Korea, Malaysia, and so on. And you see all of the 10 parameters represented here. And you'll notice when you get these slides and when we actually publish our index, you'll see that Singapore is strong in about 6 categories, but 4 of the categories Singapore needs to work on. And I'll touch on some of those later in my presentation. But you see that Singapore is in that top band of nations, right? There's 6 nations in Asia Pacific, that are currently in that top band, and Singapore continues to be in that top band as they've been in the 2 previous indices. Now, what are some initial conclusions that we can make from the latest Cloud Readiness Index? Well, first of all, Asia is more cloud ready compared to 12 months ago. Maybe no surprise, but we do measure the parameters with metrics that are published. So it's not the Asia Cloud Computing Association that's making a judgment on each of those 10 parameters. We actually look for published data to use as metrics for each of the parameters. And so the detail available in our white paper that we'll publish in January, you can see what indices that we use, and some of these indices are 100 or 500-page documents, right? We're summarizing that 500-page document into 1 metric out of 10, right? And then 10 metrics come up to 100. So certainly we're seeing that all boats are rising with the rising tide. Every nation is interested in driving their readiness, in improving their readiness for cloud adoption, right? In order to have benefit of cloud for all its industries, but also to encourage cloud players to come within their country. So what's the good? Okay, all countries are improving, and certainly, as our previous speakers have indicated, cloud adoption is up across the regions. The bad, okay, as I've mentioned before, data sovereignty is a weak area. As a region, we have, that is, as Asia, we have the opportunity to actually lead the world in terms of data sovereignty. We certainly need to get together, and there's a lot of efforts that the Asia Cloud Computing Association is doing in the background in order to help harmonize the laws in order to make data sovereignty a strength of the region as opposed to a weakness. But it remains a weakness today. And access, that is both broadband connectivity and international connectivity, is a weakness overall. In some nations it's a strength, but in general it's not, again, harmonized across all nations. Adoptions by SMEs, while that's increasing, it should be a lot further along than it is today, both in Singapore and in many other parts of Asia. SMEs are the strength of Asia, and SMEs are what is going to continue to shift the economic gravity of the world from North America and Western Europe towards Asia. Cloud computing is going to help them there, but we need to, as an industry and certainly as an association and as governments, need to increase that adoption by SMEs. And all of government adoption of cloud is still slow. While there are a lot of programs that have been announced, we're not seeing a lot of take-up by ministries across countries in Asia. So I'm sure some of you who are maybe as old as I am or slightly less old have seen the movie, the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, right? I'm not going to talk about the ugly. I'm going to talk about recommendations instead, right? Top band countries need to continue the trend of improving the specific weaknesses they have in metrics in order to keep the tide rising. Now, Tier 2 and Tier 3 countries need not despair, right? They are catching up slowly, but in the meantime, they still have some options to benefit from cloud computing when competing against the top-tier countries, right? Whether that's to incent specific providers within their nations to bridge the gap that the country itself has. You know, give them some either special incentives or, if you want, special dispensation against specific rules in order for them to be able to compete. And we see that happening in certain countries, for example, in the Philippines. Or focus on specific industries. For example, Thailand with gaming could be one area where they could offer cloud services, and they're already taking some steps in those areas. So focus on, instead of horizontal cloud services, on some specific vertical cloud services, right? Indonesia, for example, with mobile payments could be one area that could be a niche focus area for that country. So I want to drill down into 4 of our parameters to show you a little bit of the richness that we consider when we look at each of the parameters. Now, when you think of cloud, and especially if you talk to lay people, occasionally I'll be talking to a journalist and they'll be surprised to hear that I talk about data centers and cloud at the same time. Now, for us in the industry, we think, okay, of course, right? But many lay people think of cloud as something up in the sky. Maybe it's a big computer with shiny armor, and it all happens up there in the sky. Well, we all know that we need brick-and-mortar data centers. And brick-and-mortar data centers fail, right? There's always risks, whether those risks are around people and processes, right? The workforce quality that nations have in order to build and operate their data centers, whether it's natural disasters, right? Some countries, fortunately, Singapore is not in a natural disaster zone, right, for a lot of different reasons, but many countries in Asia are. And so those countries need to put in place mechanisms in order to compensate for the environments that they live in, right, in order to minimize the data center risk. Political stability can be an issue in some countries, right, as far as the risk to continuity of service within a data center. I won't name any countries specifically, but I'm sure you can think of some examples there. And then reliability of power supply. Certainly not a problem in Singapore, but if you think about Singapore, one of the issues with Singapore, if you think of Tier 4 data centers, is we don't have a alternate power. Oh, that was somebody at SP Power maybe objecting to my comment, but we don't have an alternate second power supply, and therefore we can't build Tier 4 data centers here. Now, you could argue, do we need a Tier 4 data center for cloud? Okay, maybe for most cloud services you don't. Nevertheless, these are part of the data center risk that need to be considered. And finally, oops, now my clicker is not working. Let's see if it goes. Oh, it goes back. There. Impact of climate change could impact data centers. We saw, well, there's the hurricane in the Philippines that happened recently, but a previous hurricane that impacted data centers in lower Manhattan, right, Hurricane Sandy, and quite a few data centers were impacted. Fortunately for our industry, cloud data centers weren't impacted. But we can see that climate change is going to bring a dynamic factor to data center risk for many nations. And hopefully cloud computing will help solve those climate changes before they impact the data centers. So a bit of a race there. Data sovereignty, as I mentioned before, the laws that govern data security, data privacy, don't cross borders as well as data, or don't cross borders as easily as data. And the Asia Cloud Computing Association did extensive research to see if anyone had come out with a comprehensive study on what data sovereignty laws were like, whether they were harmonized across countries and so on. And we found that there was really very little information available. And so we decided to invest in some primary research, and we'll be releasing this primary research within the next month to the public to show across the 14 countries that I showed to you in the Cloud Readiness Index how those laws are harmonized or less harmonized for nations. But what are the issues with data sovereignty? For example, do you know, is it legal for you to store your data offshore, right? Depending on what nation you live in. Do offshore governments, if you do decide to store your data, do offshore governments have access to that data, both legally and maybe less transparently, as we've seen with some of the things that have happened in the US recently, right? Government regulators need to act now to clarify the policies, both for data outgoing out of a nation and also data incoming into a nation. Some countries, like New Zealand, have taken a leadership role in that area, right? Other countries in Asia need to catch up, right? And then the enactment and enforcement of data privacy is critical. Now we're seeing, obviously, some steps taken in Singapore in order for that to happen, but that needs to accelerate, certainly. Now, freedom of information access, right? As I mentioned before, it's a balance between whether it's information that the nation wants to not necessarily publish or allow it to be published against the freedom of information that's required in cloud computing and that's expected in cloud computing. And so measuring that is somewhat tricky as a parameter. What we've decided is use proxies to measure that particular parameter, things like the freedom of the press, for example, and other parameters in order to, other metrics in order to measure this particular parameter. So information quality is a key cloud benefit, right? It needs, the information that's available as part of a cloud service needs to be, if you want, transparent and to a certain degree full disclosure, right? That's what's driving the internet and specifically cloud service. Now, the final parameter that I want to touch on is government usage and incentives. And with tongue-in-cheek a little bit, I call this cloud needs a big brother. Now, not the bad big brother of 1984, but big brother in terms of helping little brother. In other words, the government needs to have programs and incentives in place in order to encourage this nascent industry, which has the promise to bring advantages to all industries, needs some help, right? And that help could come with a cloud-first strategy. We've seen that work in some nations. Certainly the US in 2009 brought out that type of strategy. The CIO, the government CIO, came out with a policy around that. We've seen other nations in Asia. Australia has taken some steps in that direction. Singapore has not announced necessarily cloud first, but certainly is with G-Cloud is going in those directions. Right? All those government cloud initiatives need to be in place, but also need to be encouraged. Right? cloud usage incentives for SMEs I've already touched on, and we need to figure out why some of these incentives that are in place aren't necessarily being taken up. And then also industry integration of cloud technology. Some nations that I've worked with, specifically Japan, have taken this on board in a very serious way. Right? They're looking across all their industries and to see how cloud can further their advantages for those industries, make them more competitive by using cloud technologies. So as you can see, cloud and cloud readiness is a complex and multifaceted approach, and the Cloud Readiness Index attempts to simplify that by producing an index, but at the same time, that's just a starting point for the conversations to happen with legislators and regulators. Now, what's Singapore's cloud readiness status? Well, the good, certainly, we'll start with that. Singapore continues to be in the top band of ACCA's Cloud Readiness Index. We've improved data privacy with the release of the DPDA, right? And that's going to continue to lift up Singapore. Now, if you look in the Cloud Readiness Index, Singapore doesn't get a good score for data privacy. Why is that? Because we're looking at published metrics, all right? And published metrics look at what's reality on the ground, right? The effects of this Data Privacy Act hasn't necessarily taken place yet. So we'll see that score improving. But that's good, right? Certainly Singapore is seen as a data center hub, right? And its potential data exchange, right? So these things are all positive things. And the SME opportunity is being addressed. What are the bad? What are areas of improvement for Singapore? Well, Singapore has actually slipped in the Cloud Readiness Index, certainly in rank position, right? New Zealand has passed it in the rank. So we as a nation, we need to continue to be looking at our position in the top tier and make sure we don't slip out of that top tier. We're lagging behind in some areas like business sophistication, like freedom of information. Right? Those areas we need to continue to improve on. Right? There's still some confusion in the FSI industry, right, on the use of cloud. That needs to be clarified. And certainly as an association, we're taking some steps to do that, holding workshops with stakeholders in the FSI industry within Singapore, like we've done in Hong Kong, in order to help them understand what other nations are doing in order to clarify some of that confusion. And then some of the regulatory constraints that I've touched on also need to be improved within Singapore. So, as an association, our mission is to accelerate the adoption of cloud in Asia, and specifically in all of the 14 countries that I've mentioned in the CRI. Right? Some of the tools in order to help governments, help the various stakeholders, enterprises, cloud service providers, IT vendors that we're publishing are things like the Cloud Readiness Index. Version 3 is going to be out in January 2014. On the 5th of December, we're going to publish our data sovereignty study. And we are continuing to do work around SMEs and studying how SMEs across all of these 14 nations can make use of cloud. And we have a cloud assessment tool that's available on our website, AsiaCloud, www.asiacloud.org, in order to help both cloud service providers and cloud consumers come together and talk the same language. The cloud assessment tools enables that to happen. So, with that, I invite you to come join us, help us shape Asia's cloud future, both in Singapore and other countries in Asia, if you're from other countries here in the room. Collaborate with us, leading companies, both vendors and service providers and enterprises, and even, as I mentioned before, independent consultants in order to shape that future and magnify your influence. Certainly, we'd like you to join us in any capacity you can, and so you can contact us at membership@asiacloud.org, visit our website, as I've mentioned, or contact us through social media. So with that, I thank you very much, and I look forward to your contributions. Thank you.